And hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the South Texas Border Sports Podcast. I am the host, Ray Silva. Don't forget, you can hear our podcast through Apple iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and of course, our brand new platform, podpage.com/ Pro Sports RGV. And fans, if you like to listen to your podcast on Amazon Alexa, we're pretty soon going to be launching there. And also coming up next week, I'm going to have a fan who has attended the Houston Texans training camp as well. So be on the lookout for that episode next week. But for this week's episode, I'd like to welcome in KRGV Sports Director Alex Del Barrio, who recently attended Dallas Cowboys training camp, and they're getting ready to launch a big old special of high school football here shortly. Alex, how are you? How's everything going? And good to have you back on the show.
Yeah, Ray, I'm glad to be back on with you. I know it's a busy time, I think, for all of us as we get set for another season of not just high school football here in the Valley, but just football in general. It keeps us kind of all busy with obviously the NFL, going to training camp and all that, and getting ready for that season. Of course, the high school preparations. We got our high school football preview show to get ready for. And then just the start of the season and just doing what we do best at KRGV, and that's try to put on the best high school football coverage that we can do. And then, but obviously with the fall comes a lot of stuff going on: men's and women's soccer, UTRGV, and obviously the Toros are still playing. So there's just a lot happening right now. So busy time for all of us, but good to be on with you.
Absolutely, and you talk about keeping everything on our toes, and I'll ask you something that hasn't kept us on our toes. Uh, Mahmoud Abdel Fattah, he's departed now for the Houston Rockets, and I know it's kind of a difficult subject to touch here, but uh, have you heard any news upon the Vipers trying to look for a new head coach? Now, you've worked with the organization for so many years, and you've seen a lot of coaching changes within the organizations, either call-ups to the NBA or getting national team jobs. Um, where would you probably think that search is going, and how soon do you think we'll hear an announcement?
That's a very good question, Ray. I think when you've looked at how they've approached different hires in the past, it's always been kind of like different every single time. When they hired Chris Finch, who's now the head coach of the Timberwolves, that was when the Rockets had just barely taken over basketball ops. And like at that time, no one really wanted these jobs, as it's not in terms of if you're a college coach looking to get into pro, like the money wasn't the same, so you just kind of stayed in college. Actually, what a lot of people don't remember that Dave Leto actually took the job to be the Vipers head coach when Clay had gotten fired and the Rockets had taken over basketball ops and wanting to hire a new coach. And then Dave Leto kind of pulled out. Dave Leto's been around the block with different college teams. I think he coached at DePaul, and I think he coached at Virginia during his career. And Chris was not the number one choice. He obviously ended up taking the job, and obviously great things happened. We won the championship that year, but it wasn't a sought after job because it was a new thing to have these hybrid affiliations. Then as after Chris left, Nick Nurse was already in the league. He had been with the Iowa Energy, which was an unaffiliated franchise at the time, or at least not affiliated in the same way that the Vipers were. So he took the job. Obviously, he had the pedigree of a championship winning coach already. The Energy had beaten the Vipers for the championship the previous season before he took the job. So he was a commodity that already existed elsewhere in the league. Then when Nick left and they they went the route of going with Nevada Smith. They wanted somebody kind of new and fresh, some new ideas and things like that. He kind of came from honestly out of nowhere. And then you look at everybody who's been hired since, they've all kind of been in the Rockets system. And I kind of think that that's been the transition in terms of how they're approaching this job now, with us being very close to one-to-one affiliation around the G League and the NBA, that you're already grooming your next head coach. Whether it's someone already on the Vipers staff or someone in the Rockets staff up in Houston, I kind of think that that's the route that's going to happen. But I couldn't tell you for sure. I haven't heard a lot of rumblings from the outside of anybody, kind of moving into that spot from elsewhere in the league, like another head coach. Because you're starting to see a situation now where all those head coaches around the league, they're all employed by the parent clubs now. It's not like back in the day, 10 years ago, where the head coaches were sometimes being paid locally. Now you're at your situation where the ownership's not really involved in the coaching search. The team is doing it entirely. They're paying for that, and they're paying a little bit more than they used to for these head coaching positions. So I think they're going to try to use them to promote talent from within. And I think that's kind of be the direction that we'll see with the Rockets moving forward. I'll be very surprised if it's not Rashid Hazard or Evan Harville or somebody else in the basketball staff in Houston.
Absolutely, Alex. And moving on from topics for a bit, you've been a broadcaster the vast for a good portion of your career. And the entire baseball world was shaken with the death of Vin Scully. And you
Yeah.
just talk about you were heavily influenced by his work to try to become a broadcaster of sorts, whether it be behind the mic, whether doing a little bit of television, a little bit of radio, even public address announcing. And you just talk about some of the effects that you kind of like tried to try to replicate to the best of the abilities, because I guess my favorite part of Vince Scully was how he told stories.
Mm-hmm. I think, Ray, just to say that, like, there's nothing that I'll ever be able to do, or nothing that any broadcaster ever puts on a headset or calls a game could ever do to emulate Vin Scully, because I think he was on a cloud of his own. Like there was no one better at that than Vin Scully. I think any of us that try to duplicate his cadence and to his ability to weave in seemingly nonsensical stories, but stuff that actually kind of brought your ear to the speaker, so to speak. It's unmatched. And I think for me, in terms of influence, I think just knowing that he was the best, and I think more than anything, it's just trying to understand how what we do is, especially in baseball. I spent a lot of time calling games by myself throughout the years in my early career with the Roadrunners and the Coyotes baseball franchises here locally, calling those games by myself. And it's quite the learning experience on how to kind of approach broadcasting, because you don't have anything to bounce things off of, and you start to try to figure out ways to not make the broadcast boring, or just to add something to the game that people are already listening. And just try to be friendly with your audience, even though they can't really respond back to you. Finding a way to almost talk to them like a friend. And I think Vin Scully certainly executed that better than anyone. Is he made you feel like you were part of the conversation of the game. It sounded like every time that you watched a Dodger game or watched a game that he was on the call for, he made you feel like he was the uncle or the grandfather in the room, telling a 5, 6, 7-year-old version of yourself a story of a ball player or a person of consequence. And it always seemed like everything that came out of his mouth was so planned out and so perfect that that it was meant to be a part of that broadcast, and the broadcast was meant to unfold the way it was. I spent some time yesterday listening to his call of the ninth inning of Sandy Koufax's perfect game, and I was just mesmerized by his pacing and the stories he told, and being able to kind of capture the moment just through his words. And I think the most important thing about I think Vin, though, that we missed despite his broadcasting excellence, was that he was referred to as a gentleman, someone that was very kind, someone that always spent time to mentor younger people, to introduce himself to new people in the press box, and just being just an all around nice person to deal with. And in an era where egos tend to be the highest paid personalities in our medium, people with loud voices and hot takes, etc. To be someone that's a gentleman and someone that's revered for his kindness, that's more the limb that I would love to be a part of. In terms of a broadcasting tree, is someone that was considered to be kind and helpful and just grateful to have that type of position, rather than someone with an ego or just a lack of awareness of 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 uh, of the stature they actually do hold.
Uh, that for me, I mean, this goes into a, different question that segues into Vince Scully. For you, what was the first time, or what was the last broadcast of Vince Scully other than the Sandy Koufax no hitter? What was the previous one that you remember, like from a modern game, that he called? And I can tell you mine real quick. It was when the I want to say it was Dodgers Giants. Madison Bumgarner was on the bump, and I can remember hearing Vince Scully tell the story about how Madison Bumgarner saved two rabbits being eaten from a snake during a spring training once. I thought that was like one of the most like appalling stories I'd ever heard. Like if he would have been National Geographic's voice for nature, he certainly had the cadence for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was somebody that I think, more than anything, you couldn't even figure out where he would get these stories from, and because from what I've been told, he didn't spend a whole lot of time in the clubhouse these days, and he spent or these days, or near the end of his career. He liked to have that separation between the players, so I think he spent a lot of time talking to sports writers and just reading biographies and talking to the sports writers who had a personal relationship with players, and maybe talking to their families, etc. But it's incredible, the stories that he would come up with. As far as what games that I remember when I was in college, and I was first starting to get the itch to do this, right, and figuring out the path that I was on, and I got the MLB radio package online back when that was like in its infancy. And I remember it being so cool that you could choose between either the home or visitors broadcast. And I remember that during the playoffs that year, Jose Lima, who I had been a fan of when he was with the Astros, he was pitching for the Dodgers at the time. And the Dodgers were in the playoffs. This was 2004. And they were playing St. Louis in the playoffs. And the only game the Dodgers won in that series was game three, than the one that Jose Lima pitched. And I just remember listening to him kind of speak on Jose Lima and the type of game he was having, and it being a bounce back kind of game for him, etc. Because he had not pitched particularly well all season, but he was a guy that did well in that postseason. I think he won. I think he won like 13 games that year, so he wasn't terrible, but he certainly wasn't. He wasn't was what he was when he was with the Astros, and he kind of felt like he kind of made you feel like this was like the game that Jose Lima was hoping to have from his time in Houston, etc. So there wasn't like a wacky story that kind of drove me in. there. But I always remember the big moments he called. Like as much as I hated to hear it as a Red Sox fan. One of the calls that I remember more than anything is his Buckner call. He was on the call for NBC, calling that the '86 World Series, and the ball went through Buckner's legs, and that whole inning, I think, is a really fascinating listen if you're a broadcaster and want to listen to the way you kind of set up big moments and try to make sure that you stay with the action, but also try to retell how we got to that point in the game. And I think he was very good at that in late moments situations of like retelling the story of the game for those that are just now joining. So everyone wants to talk about like the weaving in and out of stories that Ben did, but he was as good in big moments as anyone that we listen to now. And I think in this whole remembrance of his passing, we should be remembering not only the poetry that he would give us and the seemingly nonsensical stories, but also his ability to elevate those fantastic and memorable moments of Major League Baseball history.
You bring up an interesting name. The same Jose Lima that pitched for the Astros and once referenced Enron Field as home run field, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why that Jose, when you brought up Jose Lima, I instantly thought Enron Field, home run field for some odd reason. But Alex, I will leave you with this one last question. Just
Okay.
switching over to wrestling gears. Vince McMahon retires amid a lot of issues just outside of WWE. Do you just kind of figure with the entrance of Triple H, there might be a changing of a culture and a culture where wrestlers that could have feared for their job can kind of sort of relax a little bit, knowing that okay, the the pressure's still on me to perform at a high level, but now you can do it a little bit more appeasing, knowing that you're not going to have someone watching over my shoulder type of that kind of pressure.
I think it's very different than that, Ray. To be honest with you, I think the frustration that talent usually had with Vince, or the culture that existed there, or maybe still to some degree still exists, and it's going to be weaned off over the next few years, is not so much talent being afraid of Vince. It's that it was more that they could not. They felt like they could not be themselves or contribute to their own characters or offer feedback or their own ideas because of the fear of rocking the apple cart with Vince. So a lot of you see a lot of talent kind of retreat back to sticking to the script and not going off of that, and couple that with Vince not really understanding this new era of of entertainment and this new era of talent and this new era of the business, that things kind of became disjointed, discombobulated. Talent get frustrated. You can tell the talent is frustrated. And then you have like situations where talent will walk out or just get released because they feel disinterested or devalued, or they just get devalued because Vince sees nothing in them because of a bad decision. I think with Hunter running things now, he's worked with a lot of this talent in NXT when he was running it there from 2015 through about 2019, 2020. And there's already a comfort level with him in terms of contributing to their character and presenting ideas and coming up with their own promos, etc. So I think you're going to see over time a shift in the culture and a shift in the way the product is presented. I think it's going to take some time because you still have a writing core that has to write the shows. I mean, writing a 3-hour show for a Monday and writing a 2-hour show for a Friday and writing a 2-hour show for a Wednesday, that's a lot of work, and no one person can do that. This isn't the 1990s where they had 1 hour of Monday Night Raw and 1 hour of syndicated television a week, and that was it. Writing 5, 6, 7 hours of television is takes a lot of people. So the type of forward planning that needs to exist almost needs to happen a little bit more delicately and require change over time to kind of get to a point where, okay, we know we want to get here. How do we get there, so to speak? We know that in 6 months at SummerSlam we want so and so to win this championship, and we want to elevate him to that point. We can deviate from that plan, but let's make that our plan. What do we do for the next 5 months to get us to that point? That stopped in WWE. So I think Hunter is used to planning long term because that's the way they did it in NXT. So I think you'll start to see 3-month, 4-month, 5-month programs with talent as opposed to these 1-month one-offs that you see kind of happen with TV and then to the pay-per-view or special events or whatever they're calling them these days. I do think the culture is going to change there. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I still think that there's some changes to be made still. I think Nick Khan kind of taking over as co-CEO after being president for about a year now. Look, the whole idea of him taking over that job is to get this company ready for a sale. I don't know when that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen too far down the road. And whether it's a company like NBC Universal or Comcast as the primary organization there, or a Viacom or Disney or someone like Apple or Amazon kind of come in to buy them. I do think that the company is going to be sold at some point. And that adds another wrinkle to that. So you're still kind of, I think, in the middle part of what are several monumental changes to that company. But in terms of the on-air product, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of immediate changes, but I think you're going to see talent be a lot more loose and a lot happier with the backstage environment, I think is another thing. And I do think you'll start to see some talent maybe return to WWE that may have left just for the sake of it being a little bit more easier on talent who go back there and don't feel like they're going to be underutilized or misused.
ADB, many thanks so much for coming by and sharing some of the stories and knowledge of everything that you have. Thanks a lot. Just give us a reminder when fans can expect the big high school football preview. And I know you threw a little wrinkle a few months ago, maybe I may have missed it, but when is Spiked coming back?
That's a good question. So first we'll tell you that our coverage of high school football, obviously the season begins with the first football Friday on the 26th of August. If you can believe that, it's 3 weeks from today. We will have our first high school football Friday. So we will have our high school football preview show on the 24th, which is 3 weeks from this past Wednesday. And then we'll have our first day of high school football coverage on the 25th. As far as Spiked, I don't know if it's going to return as the same show, meaning the same format. It was a little longer than I wanted it to be after kind of going back and reevaluating. I did like the interview portion, and I did like the week-to-week conversation about the teams that week. I think it's going to return in some form. I don't know in what total form. I don't know by what name, and I don't know how many times per week. But I do know that it's something that I want to do. It's something that I did want to do over the last 2 years. I think I'm finally in a place in terms of like equipment and in terms of just like time of the day to be able to execute that project again. If you remember when I did it the first time, I wasn't really doing a whole lot. So I was kind of doing it. It's kind of a side project. So hopefully I'll be able to find the time and coordinate with some coaches and be able to do that all over again. Because there's some intriguing names that we didn't get to the first time around. To do obviously some new faces in a lot of different places, and just some folks that I've never really had the chance to have a long form conversation with. So that can be a lot of fun. So hopefully at some point later this summer and early part of this fall, we'll have some sort of podcast back.
All right, many thanks, ADB. Thanks for joining us. And folks, this has been another episode of the South Texas Border Sports Podcast.
Hello, sports fans. Thanks for listening to another episode of the South Texas Border Sports Podcast. This is your host, Ray Silva. Be tuned next week for another great episode as we drop podcasts every Monday here on anchor.fm/STBS. Don't forget, our podcast can also be found via Google Podcast, Apple iTunes, and Spotify. Thanks for listening.